So this is science, and I asked science, how likely is it that we're all alone in the universe? And I guess I was expecting that usual response of a 1 in 60 billion chance of life, or something of that nature. But science, slightly annoyed I might add, as if I totally missed something, says, well, the question itself is already making so many assumptions that you're not even aware of. Like, when you state that you're all alone, how did you reach that conclusion? So I say, well, the other planets around us, or at least the ones in our solar system, seem to all be empty. So science says, according to what? So I say, according to what we see. And at first I'm thinking science is just playing it cheeky with all these cryptic responses. But just then, science gives me this sly smile and says, if you can't see any life on the spinning spheres all around you, are you sure it's because the life's not there? Or could there be something that's acting as a barrier between you and the life that's already present? And at first I'm thinking, what is science on about? I mean, we see living organisms at their finest teeming and beaming across our whole planet, but we don't see any of that anywhere else in outer space. That's just our objective reality. We see life here, we don't see life there. But then I thought, this is science after all, so I should probably give the idea a chance. After a while, it sort of dawned on me. Because for us to even say we're all alone, we need to make sure the tools we use to reach that conclusion are actually up for the job. Because the moment we try to explain why our eyes are seeing what they're seeing, we assume that they're doing a good job. But are they really? Don't get me wrong, the eyes are great at what they do here, at our level. But the moment you move up the scale, it turns out the eyes are actually terrible. Because whatever they see turns out to be the opposite. Like, not even close, just the opposite of what they see. And the obvious example would be how the eyes see the Earth as flat. Because it's really big, so without a telescope, it just looks flat. And then it turned out that the Earth is the opposite of flat. It's a sphere. Or when we see the sun moving around us. So we used to think the sun revolved around us because it doesn't feel like we're moving. And we see the sun is moving. Which, again, it didn't turn out to be close or somewhat similar to reality. It turned out to be the opposite. We actually revolve around the sun. What we see at the planetary level is the opposite. The eyes do a great job here and a terrible, deplorable job when it comes to the planetary scale. If it's something to do with us, the eyes are great. If it's something to do with the planets or stars, the eyes are useless. So then we build tools that try to compensate for all this, like telescopes. But now we're in a situation where we use these tools to look at even bigger scales, like galaxies. And suspiciously, they all seem to look like flat disks. Kind of like the problem we had with how the Earth looks flat without a telescope. So it's almost like we're back to square one, where even the once reliable tools might actually be confusing us instead of helping us make sense of what's really going on up there. So you might as well create the following rule and say, whatever my eyes, my senses, and even my logic or thought process, which usually result from my senses trying to interpret the world, will always be the opposite of what's really there when moving up the scale. And this is where we really need to understand something about what's really up there. Again, you can choose not to believe this, but not believing something because your senses are telling you it's far-fetched, when you're in a situation where your senses aren't even working properly, you're doing yourself a serious disservice, because listening to your senses up there is pushing you as far as possible from what's actually there. What's actually there, it isn't complicated. It's really easy to see and understand, just as long as the seeing part isn't done with your eyes. It's done with your brain. Here's how simple our planet situation actually is. Take the fact that it seems like we're all alone in the universe, and add to that the fact that we're getting the life we have here from an outside source. More specifically, there's this bigger sphere, right? And it's initiating the process that gives us life on our smaller sphere. You're literally looking at the sphere that's responsible for the life we have here, and you're scratching your head thinking, oh, our sphere must be more alive than the one that's giving us our life. And why? Because it looks like a fireball? Who cares what it looks like if it's initiating the process that gives you life? If we get to be alive thanks to that bigger sphere, you're obliged to say, well, the bigger sphere has to be more alive than us if it's the source. And only after you say that, you can then go ahead and ask, So why are we seeing a ball of fiery plasma instead of people, animals, and vegetation? Hold on. Our sphere, that's supposed to somehow be more alive than its own source, also just happens to be wrapped in a salty life-supporting fluid? And we can't see any life out there? Are you kidding me? Can you not see why we can't see? What do you think this tells us about the state our planet is in? If the thing we belong to is having its life originate from an outside source, and if it feels like we're all alone, even though statistically it shouldn't be possible, and if it's wrapped in a salty life-supporting fluid, it probably means our planet is currently undergoing the very familiar process of gestation. In other words, our planet is physically inside the womb, and we are the fetus's neural network. Your daily life is what an individual neuron experiences inside the brain of the fetus it belongs to. Now, I know, your reaction to hearing this might involve a chuckle, or even two. It's hard to believe, isn't it? And not only that, all of your senses are going to try to convince you that it's not true. Are you really going to rely on your senses in a place that's so far away from their jurisdiction? You see, isolation is going to have this effect where it's going to lead you towards the wrong conclusions about your own reality. And it's only when you put your senses aside that you're actually giving yourself a chance. So if we're really in isolation, does this mean that our very own sun is just as alive as our planet? I mean, how does that work? The sun doesn't look like the ideal place for life. Wait, it doesn't look like the ideal place for life, but what it looks like to us becomes meaningless if our planet's in isolation. So does this mean that all the planets and stars out there have vegetation, animals, and people? Remember, we don't need to see it to know it. By knowing what we have here, we know what to expect on all the other spheres because of the relationship between them, as opposed to what our senses can detect. See the difference between what most people do, which is examining the universe with their senses, hoping that nature is giving their senses any access, or examining the universe knowing our senses are limited, recognizing relationships without the need to rely on the senses at all. Look, I know when you're looking at the surface of other planets, you want to believe there's nothing there. It's not just your eyes telling you there's nothing there, it's everyone's eyes. When you look to your left and you look to your right, you've got billions of other people just like you, and they believe that the eyes are doing a great job in outer space. There's just nothing there, they'll tell you. It's all empty. All the observations have confirmed it's all empty. But that's the whole point of isolation. Look, you can side with everyone else, or you could be the person who evaluates a situation based on the actual evidence. And even though it's so tempting to consider sight as evidence, we see it, so it must be true, we can't do it. The eyes need to sit this one out. You can do whatever you want. You can keep thinking the surface of all the other spheres out there is empty. And all you're doing is just pushing the solution further and further away from you. So here's my prediction. You will never find life on a distant planet, no matter how sophisticated your telescopes become or how impressive your technological leaps may seem to be, because you're searching for something that's already there. Not on some distant planet where things randomly evolved, but everywhere on the surface and inside of each and every sphere all around us. And I know it's so hard to accept, isn't it? It's hard to think that at this moment on a planet like Mars or Jupiter, or even our own fiery plasma blasting sun, where life seems impossible, there is a very normal, unassuming crust that we can't see, with vegetation that we can't see, and animals that are beyond what we're allowed to see, and people who, just like us at some point in their collective journey, also believed that they were the only ones in existence. In fact, people on a planet right next to us could have been looking directly at us with their telescopes. And you know what planet Earth would look like to them? Like all the other lifeless planets. Just another empty crust in a universe that only seems like it's full of them. You were searching for planets that look like us without realizing that we already look like all the other planets. You wouldn't agree if someone said our planet was empty, right? You're right there. Your own existence confirms our planet is alive. So why are you saying other planets are empty when ours is full? without considering that they might be seeing you in the same way that you see them. The bottom line is that isolation explains everything. Isolation explains things like the Fermi paradox, where statistically speaking, we should have seen life on other planets by now, but we don't. And isolation solves this paradox easily, because if we're isolated and all the planets and stars out there are alive and kicking, then there is no paradox, because the life that's supposed to be there is there. Isolation in the process of gestation is the answer. And the only real challenge here is wrapping your head around it, because let's be honest, your eyes have been wrapped around this for far too long. Our solar system, our galaxy, our universe, and far beyond is a life extravaganza, bursting with living organisms in every direction. See how life on our planet is just unstoppable everywhere you look? Well, it's the same out there as well, not just on the spheres themselves, but in the space in between those spheres also. And just because we can't see it doesn't mean, and will never mean, it's not really there. Stop being an eye worshiper and start evaluating our mutual objective reality from a neutral perspective. Thanks for watching. And if you feel like what you've just heard is objectively true, then I'd like you to do me a favor and share this video so every person on this planet has the opportunity to think about this for themselves. If you want to learn more and have questions like, if our planet is an actual fetus, then where did its arms and legs go? And why does it look like a sphere? And most importantly, what happens after our planet is born? Then go ahead and watch some of my other videos where I cover all this in more detail.